Hey guys, tonight we step out under a sky, the color of old pewter, where the road yawns like a sleepy ribbon and your breath makes little ghosts that drift ahead to scout the ruts for you. You're pack C. You're carrying breakfast the way travelers have for centuries. Bread that could probably stop an arrow. A wedge of cheese that doubles as a paperweight. And a small belly of ale sloshing in a leather costrel that sighs against your hip like a patient dog. You probably won't survive this in the sense that within 10 minutes, your eyelids will grow as heavy as millstones and you'll start bargaining with the sun about turning around for just 5 more who, if you're listening, drop a note with where you are and what time it is. I love seeing our midnight map stretch across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shoulder the road with the first light, fingers stiff, mind already counting steps between bites. Breakfast is not a ceremony, it's a calculation. You break the muslin loaf of mingled grain bread, oh. The crust is loud, a gravelly music. The crumb is close and damp with yesterday's steam. When grain prices soar, loaves shrink, and you've learned to chew slowly enough to convince your stomach that good fortune has returned. Mainstream fact: in places like medieval England, the assize of bread and ale, fixed bread weight to grain cost, a bureaucratic love letter to both fairness and hunger. You take a measured mouthful, and your jaw does that early day workout no pilgrim requested. The cheese you unwrap is hard and trusty. Cow if you're near dairy country. Sheep if hills are close. It's wrapped in a cloth that smells of salt and the faint meadow of its making. You pair it with why. And for a second, your whole being warms. A joke, uninvited. If knives had frequent sure programs, yours would be gold status by now. You wedge a second slice between bread and consider the road's arithmetic again. Miles to the next crossing. Miles to the next bench-shaped rock. Miles to the next friendly hedge where the wind is less. Your costrel's stopper squeaks. The ale is small beer strength. More bread you can drink than trouble you can cause. Historians still argue whether people drink ale because water is broadly unsafe, or because ale is simply nourishing and cultural. Today, the answer is short, and obvious: ale tastes better than ditch water, and carries fewer regrets than vineyard courage. You chew and you walk. The rhythm is ancient, older than the first milestone, as steady as your breath. The sun lifts, thin as a coin fresh from the die. You pass a field and greet a plowman who raises 2 fingers, the medieval peace sign of I'm holding a handle, don't make me wave with my chin. He calls something about the weather that might be blessing or prophecy. Either way, your bread feels lighter. Inside your pack, a paper twist of salt rattles. A pinch on a slice can pull miracle sweetness from the plainest crumb, and you guard that salt like a dragon guards spreadsheets. Another pocket holds dried pears, wrinkled, homely, irresistible. You ration them by mood, promising yourself one for every hill. Then negotiating shamelessly when the hill has the nerve to be longer than it looked. Second light joke. Your rationing discipline is a cathedral from the outside and a barn with a missing door from the inside. Your feet navigate the honest truth of travel. Food must survive motion. That's why your bread is dense, your cheese durable, your fruit dried to a chewable memory of orchards. Anything that demands a spoon is a town food, a bench food, a food with witnesses. On the road, your fingers are your cutlery. Your knife, the punctuation. Sometimes you pack peas pudding that's set overnight, a sliceable green brick that knows exactly what it is and dares you not to appreciate its sincerity. A heel of yesterday's trencher, the platter-thick slice of bread that once served as your plate has hardened into a travel biscuit. It's not elegant, but it's clean, and it carries a whisper of last night's stew like a footnote you can eat. Quirky tidbit: Some travelers rub cut garlic on bread, not only for flavor but as a talisman against bad air. If vampires are real, they're definitely seeking more adventurous diners. The road offers its own condiments. You pause where a hedgerow bows, pinch a sprig of wild thyme, and bruise it between your fingers to wake its sleepy scent. A leaf or two tucked into your cheese bread makes an edible sermon about little joys. If you're lucky, you find a twig snag of sloes left from last year's stubbornness. Their skins dusty with astringent memory. You pocket them as future flavor for the ale when it turns bored. The costrel soothes your throat. The tiny beer is lively with what the maltster knows and the brewer trusts. You swallow and feel it land like a candle lit inside your chest. Wind knits your cloak tighter. The road dips, floods its low places with puddles that stage interviews with the sky, and climbs again. Your hunger ebbs and returns with a fiddler's patience. You remember to check the binding on the cheesecloth. Vermin will burrow through anything that smells like a promisand. Retie it with a knot you could manage in the dark. You think of saints and sinners, of pilgrims who left home with nothing but faith and a spare pair of socks, and those whose baggage trains looked like ambitious weddings. You are ordinary, which is to say remarkable in the way all endurance is. Third light joke. If sainthood were awarded for resisting second breakfast, the calendar would be 12 months of your face. A cart squeals up behind and lurches past, the driver snapping his tongue at the horse with a rhythm you almost recognize from a market song. You take the draft's wake as an excuse to stop and sip again. The ale's low alcohol is part safety, part strategy. No one wants to mistake a wayside ditch for a featherbed, but its barley sweetness smooths the road's edges. A thought steps alongside. The debate about medieval water is not just about fear. It's about habit, taste, and the busy microbial lives in wells and rivers. Historians still argue whether rural streams were commonly fine to drink and towns were the culprits, or whether boiling in pottage and brewing in small beer were simply sanity in a wooden bucket world. You hedge your bets with ale and keep walking. On days when luck and careful packing meet, you carry a little twist of mustard seed, crushed with a spoon or a stone, into a paste that turns bread into ambition. On leaner days, you scrape the inside of your cheesecloth with your knife, harvesting the soft, spreadable ghost clinging to the weave. Hunger teaches gratitude for crumbs with better manners than you. You tuck the knife away, reposition the pack's strap where it digs at your collarbone, and breathe the clean, slightly sour smell of trampled lane and old rain. Birds unlatch the hedges. A rook watches you like a customs officer. The miles soften after food. Your stride lengthens. Your thoughts drift wider. You remember to bless the miller, the dairymaid, the brewer, even the mule that didn't kick the cask. The road carries you forward, and your breakfast plane's sturdy. Portable has done exactly what the morning requires, turned effort into comfort and miles into something you can measure with the satisfied click of your teeth. By noon, the road has warmed enough to smell like baked clay and old stories, and your stomach, which has the memory of a bell, chimes you toward the nearest signboard. You know the clues: a hoop of vine or ivy hung above a door, a painted tankard, a creaking board with a boar or mermaid that has outlived 3 generations of paint. You slip inside where breath turns to steam and the room is held together by heat, smoke, and hope. Benches crowd along trestle tables. A dog with a union card naps under the settle. Someone argues about wool prices with the energy usually reserved for theology. The host sees your road-dusted cloak and gives you the nod that means, in all dialects, coin first, comfort second, stories as garnish. They put a trencher down yesterday's bread reborn as a plate, thick as a cutting board and already sugared with crumbs of other people's histories. Onto it pours pottage, a steady, steaming democracy of peas, onions, barley, and whatever kindness a bone can lend after its better days. Call it soup with ambition. You dip a spoon if there is one. Often you use your knife and loaf and taste a world held together by salt and patience. Mainstream fact. In much of medieval Europe, the alehouse tavern and inn were distinct creatures. Alehouses, selling ale brewed on site, taverns selling wine, and inns offering lodging and meals in. While one building might wear more than one hat, the signage and license told you which hat fit best. For today, the hat is warm and edible. It's a fast day, the kind that dots the calendar like pebbles across a Good Friday's Lent. Vigils, so meat is off the table for those who observe, and even many who don't observe it to keep the peace. Fish swims into the menu. Herring arrives, salted and modest, its silver memory dulled by a winter in barrels. But when warmed in the pottage with a squeeze of verjuice, it remembers the sea. Eel pie grins from another table. Tails baked through the lid like punctuation marks that warn you about bones. A neighbor tears his fish with practiced fingers and glances at your costrel. You trade a sip of your small ale for a heel of his rye, the first barter of the day, as old as appetite. Light joke 1. You tell yourself you prefer fast days because they're simpler. Then discover you can eat 3 bowls of simplicity without blinking. Noise swells, the air a tapestry of scolding and laughter. A serving wench shoulders through with a bucket of small beer and a ladle, topping up mugs with a priestly solemnity that says she has seen spills become wars. You catch a second ladle at the rim, polite, because your morning ale and the road's dust have negotiated a truce in your throat. Historians still argue whether spices were ever used to mask questionable meat, or whether the dear dazzling pepper, ginger and saffron were primarily flexes of wealth and careful flavoring for preserved foods. You, with your mustard twist from the morning, decide to believe in both thrift and taste. You grind a little seed against the trencher and wake the pottage like an old friend roused from a nap. The host offers a cheat stew, yesterday's pot, married to today's, with a handful of fresh greens, honest about its lineage, and priced accordingly. You nod. Hunger is rarely a purist. Bread walls soak up gravy, become supple and purposeful, and you tear off an edge of the trencher that has drunk enough to qualify as a separate dish. Quirky tidbit. In busy houses, a running tab might be kept with a chalk mark on a beam, or with a notched tally stick split between you and the host. At settling time, the married halves confess the truth better than memory. You promise yourself not to run a tab. Memory has already wandered off to stare at the pie. Someone near the fire haggles over a piece of salt cod the size of a hembuck. The host puffs and pokes the hearth until the iron pot resumes its gentle hymn. The smell of onions, ale, fish, and wood smoke blends into the sort of perfume that would never sell by the bottle but could make a kingdom kneel at supper time. A traveler with a scallop badge from Compostela spoons his food with the badge itself. Pilgrims get practical and grins as if this is the punchline to a long joke about shoes. You nod because you've rubbed garlic on bread before and called it medicine and miracle. Today, you crumble a little thyme, remember that. Hedgerow sprig over the bowl and pretend you're the sort of person who writes cookbooks for saints. The bench becomes a friend. Heat soaks into your bones. The ache in your shoulders loosens its belt, and conversation turns to the early pea crop, the morality of short measures, and whether the king prefers venison, boiled or roasted, possibly both. A man at the end of the table swears he tasted pepper once, and saw heaven. Another swears pepper is a fraud sold to the gullible by men who can't count change. You ask about the road ahead and learn everything and nothing. This bridge is a liar. That hill is kinder than it looks. The next town has a pie woman who could adopt the devil and feed him into virtue. Light joke 2. You conclude that pies are the true spiritual directors of this realm. You watch the flow of the room for a while. A traveler who looks wealthier keeps his own spoon and cuts his meat not today with a handsome eating knife. Someone else dips a crust into your pottage with a raised eyebrow that asks friend. And you nod because food shared is lighter to carry. Historians still argue whether these places were predominantly male dens of rumor or mixed social rooms where women traded. 8. And managed the ledgers. The truth, as usual, appears to be it depends on town, trade, hour, and who just walked in the door. Today it's a braid of everyone, carters with shoulders like barns, a widow with a neat purse, 2 clerks who look like punctuation marks in search of a sentence. The host lays out a plate of wafers at the end, then crisp, browned like good news, served with a drizzle of honey and a laugh that means festival day or not, people like a treat. In richer hours you might see comfits, sugared fennel seeds that click between the teeth like tiny bells. You settle for a wafer, moral and crunchy. The fire pops. The dog sighs a paragraph. Light joke 3. You tell yourself you'll leave after one more bite. The sentence every chair in history has heard right before a nap. When the bowl is empty and the trencher has done its second job, you stack what's left bowl spoon if there was one. Good intentions and slide a coin to the host, whose face knows the weather of every payment. Mainstream fact, practical addition, the assize of bread and ale, that old watchdog, hovers even here, and a house that cheats on measure or strength risks, fines, public shame, or a visit from officials with blunt quills. You've no desire to witness paperwork. You wish the host a fair day and the dog a good dream. Collect your costrol and step into the square. Outside, a cart sells hot pies in lidded baskets, each stamped with a mark so customers blame the correct baker if they meet more bone than filling. An apprentice waves a skewer of grilled river fish, scant but honest. Somewhere a bell rings work time, prayer time. Both and the air shuffles people back to what they were doing before hunger became the boss. You tuck away a traveler's napkin, scraped clean of mustard, tie your pack, and let your feet remember what feet do. The room's warmth lingers on your skin like a blessing, and the taste of barley and onion follows you down the lane, faithful as a shadow. The road tilts toward a stone wall that keeps its own hours, and you read the quiet like a signboard, an abbey ahead. The porter's lodge sits just inside the gate, a small room with a big threshold where boot leather becomes hospitality. You knock, twice, once for bread, once for blessing, and the hatch opens on a face that has seen every variety of hunger and still greets yours like an old acquaintance. You ask for the gestel, palms open, shoulders honest. A bell remarks upon the time, not loud, just certain, and the porter nods you through with a key that could moonlight as a cudgel. You wash your hands at the lavatorium, the stone basin's water chilled and clean, and stand a moment in the herb-scented draft from the kitchen yard. Sweet gale, parsley, lovage, thyme, the same little sprigs you bruised on the road, but here they've been organized by someone who knows what mercy tastes like. A brother in a flour-dusted habit, face shining with the steam of his office, shepherds you to the guest refectory. The monks eat within the cloister, silence and scripture for their sides. Guests dine apart, words allowed to clink like spoons as long as they behave. Trenchers arrive plain but fresh. The crumb open and cheerful, this close to the ovens and bowls of pottage that hum with peas and garden greens. A dish of small fish follows, river-born and mild, their bones politely arranged to be found before they surprise you. The ale is the abbey's own, lower and gentler than market drink, because no one wants a guest to confuse the dormitory with a ditch. Mainstream fact. Benedict's rule famously instructs that all guests who present themselves are to be received as Christ, which, expressed as a menu, means no one who knocks leaves hungry. Though the fair tracks the calendar's fasts and the house's means, you find your spoon today. A wooden loner with a handle rubbed satin by years of kind abrasion, and fall to with the sort of politeness appetite understands. The almoner visits as you eat, eyes soft, ledger hard, and asks about your road, your plans, and whether you carry a letter of safe conduct. You do not. You carry a face that says I will pay what I can, and earn the rest by not being trouble, and that is often enough. He gives you a slice of something called a pittance, not a measure of regret, but a small bonus for feast days or guests, maybe a knob of fresh cheese, maybe a ladle of barley, sweetened with a suspiciously generous spoon of honey. Light joke 1. If humility had calories, the guestal would be a bakery. You eat, you listen. In the yard you glimpsed a neat grid of stews, the fish ponds that fold rivers into rectangles holding carp, tench, and eels like rainy day savings. Historians still argue whether English carp culture truly flowers only after late medieval importers get ambitious, or whether earlier monasteries quietly encouraged the pond life all along. Either way, fish on fast days feel less like deprivation and more like a plan. A brother sets down a bowl of pickled samphire that wanders inland on a pilgrim's passport. You spear a tangle and discover the sea's autograph in a green hand. Conversation flows like beer at the low end of a slope. A soldier with a healed limp confesses he's walking to a shrine to thank his knee for improving. An old woman on her way to a granddaughter points out that gratitude travels faster with warm bread in the pack. The refectorian reads a short passage at the far table for the monk's guests here. The cadence like wind in rafters, and for a heartbeat the clatter pauses, bowls lifted, eyes mild. Then the everyday recommences, which is the most blessed thing in the world. Quirky tidbit, at some houses, the dole is literal bread and a sip issued at the gate, as the wayfarer's dole. A habit so stubborn that certain places keep the tradition alive centuries later for any traveler who asks. You imagine a line of dusty boots and grateful nods that runs from the 12th century straight to your bowl. And you take another cautious swallow, in case time itself is thirsty. The almoner presses a token into your palm, a small lead badge, stamped with the house's device, good for a bed in the guest house and perhaps a second helping. If you pass through again before the week turns. Light joke 2. Congratulations! You now collect lead art. Your portfolio is up 1 saint and 2 eels. You tuck the badge into your pouch with the mustard twist, and the heroic crumb of morning cheese that has somehow survived your better nature. When you shoulder the road again, you carry the abbey's kindness as much as its calories. The town beyond the wall is already clearing its throat for market hour. The bell in the Guildhall rings a precise note that means weigh your goods and your conscience. And the square fills like a map of appetites. Linen awnings snap, casks thump down like punctuation, and a child with a face like a question announces apples, in a tone that suggests the fruit invented joy. You move through the lanes the way fish move through reeds, touching stalls with your eyes and sometimes with your coin. Bread stands parade their social ladder and flour, maslin loaf for the practical cocket, and cheat for the middling, wastel white for those who enjoy both food and statements. Mainstream detail without brag. Bakers post their weights and prices to avoid a lively visit from officials who love a scale more than a story. You buy a farthing loaf and it weighs like fairness. At the fishmonger's, salt herring crouch in barrels, a chorus of silver gray sighs. Fresh river fish lounge on reeds, with the modesty of a Wednesday. A pie woman you were warned about, tin the complimentary sense hands over a hot hand pie with steam that smells of leeks and mercy. For a heartbeat you forget to breathe, then correct the error thoroughly. Cheese sellers stack rounds like small moons. They angle you a sliver market favor. A taste to make your purse curious, and you nod your thanks with a seriousness that would flatter a cathedral. Across the way, a spice merchant shakes a tiny cascade of peppercorns into your palm and lets you inhale the distance between here and somewhere your feet have not yet dared. Historians still argue whether common kitchens ever used precious spices to camouflage bad meat, or whether that story is mostly a good line that stuck. You consider the pie's honesty and decide, flavor does not lie today. You pass the ale stall and the cider man playing friendly tug-of-war over thirst. A clerk in a neat cap counts change into a wooden tray with grooves meant to embarrass error. The waiter checks his beam with a pebble he trusts more than prayers. Quirky tidbit: some markets police cheating with public examples that nobody wants to star in, like being paraded with your faulty measure hanging around your neck fashion, but make it jurisprudence. You examine your hand pie as if it has legal opinions, then take another bite to stay on the right side of history. A woman selling greens throws in a small bundle of parsley for your pot. Traveler and winks in the language of grandmothers. A boy offers roasted chestnuts, the paper twist warming your fingers like a small, edible hearth. You add a coil of dried sausages to your pack, with the discretion of someone aware that fast days exist, but so does tomorrow. Light joke 3. You tell yourself you are provisioning, not shopping. Your pack, groaning softly, disagrees. The square teaches you the sociology of hunger. Guild rules keep elbows sharp but fair, and the market sergeants loiter with benign menace near the scales. A beggar's dog, unionized by earlier observation, settles near the pie woman's stall with a face that says he has seen centuries and they all smelled like this. You toss him a bit of crust, and his eyes sign a receipt. In the lane beyond, a hospice distributes a thin stew from a cauldron big enough to baptize a small ship. Those who can pay do, those who cannot still eat, and nobody argues with the ladle. As afternoon tilts, you sit on a low wall with a view of people being entirely themselves, bargaining, boasting, hurrying, drifting, tasting, laughing at a joke that requires only bread and time to be funny. You touch the Abbey badge in your pouch, the market parsley in your pack, the familiar shape of your knife at your belt, and the tiny packet of pepper you probably can't justify but absolutely will. Rules and kindness have built you a meal and a plan, and the road, hearing you chew contentedly, arranges its miles into something almost gentle. Fields thin into hedges and ditches, the kind of countryside that edits sound into softer versions of itself, wind downgraded to a hush, birdsong tidied into commas. You let the market's clatter fall off your shoulders and tune your eyes for food that hides in green grammar. Hedgerows are pantries with opinions, and they have long memories. Their hawthorn bones keep fields polite. Their bramble fringes file seasonal reports to anyone patient enough to read them. You are patient, and also hungry, which is the best dictionary. Hazel first. The copyist stools along the lane sprout wands, like choirboys' elbows, and last year's shells still tell you where the squirrels argued with your supper. You work a cluster loose, crack, and taste that sweet, clean nut oil and afternoon stitched together. A second and a third, because moderation is a theory. You pocket a few for later and move on, keeping an eye out for the low, frilly leaves of sorrel. Bruise one between your fingers, and the lemony scent jumps up like a good idea. A handful on bread turns your pack's last cheese into a tidy lunch with opinions. Light joke 1. Congratulations, you have invented salad by accident. You stoop for pignuts, the little earth treasures that children find with sticks and adults pretend they don't need until their stomachs remind them. You trace the wiry stem gently, coaxing the tiny tuber from its snug den, and brush off the soil with the care you usually reserve for scandal. Raw, it crunches faintly, and tastes like a shy almond. The hedgerow offers chickweed, good when young, cleavers that try to hitchhike on your sleeves, and nettles that impersonate punishment until a quick crush or a quick boil turns them into spinach that believes in you. You pinch a shoot with confidence born of a few painful lessons, and promise yourself a pan and a fire, when the road gives you both at the same time. The ditch water is a different larder. In the slow bends, you read the scribe's hand of eel, ripples, and wonder how loudly law speaks in this parish. On the one hand, the parish speaks of sharing. On the other, someone owns every bank, if not on paper, then in practice. And fish rights are the sort of property that growl when poked. Mainstream fact. The Doomsday Book 1086 famously tallies eel rents thousands upon thousands of slippery payments owed in fish, rather than coin proof that eels were not only supper, but also taxes with fins. Your knife remembers how to whittle a willow to a simple pronged fork. Your conscience remembers the porter's kind eyes at the abbey. You compromise by staring very hard at the water and thinking about ethics until the eel decides it's not a good day to volunteer. If luck and dusk align, you braid worms onto a thread for an eel bob more rumor than recipe in these parts and give the ditch a minute to consider your offer. You feel a tap, then another, like somebody knocking from the other side of a story. And you pull up only weeds because the eel can read your hesitation. Historians still argue whether eel rents mean villagers dined eels daily, or whether lords preferred their accounts in a currency that swam conveniently past. Either way, eels are both supper and ledger, and you treat them like witnesses. The hedge shifts from pantry to courtroom as you miss a rabbit's soft sprint by a heartbeat. It shoots along a run polished by generations of quick opinions and disappears under a bramble gate that looks like a lawyer's eyebrow. You carry a simple wire snare, the kind that tucks into a pocket without confessing because hunger makes a persuasive barrister. But rights are tricky. In many places, rabbits belong first to manorial warrens. Only the rabbit-shaped decisions that escape become debates. You study the low pass under the hedge. The faint brown where fur has brushed green, and set the loop with the silent prayer of someone who dislikes trouble and loves stew. Historians still argue whether rabbits were truly feral across England before the 13th century, or mostly corralled in warrens with pillow mounds and warreners who could identify a poacher's footprint like handwriting. Either way, every coney beyond a warren fence feels like a footnote with teeth. You mark the spot with a mind pin and walk on, because watching snares teaches them manners. They only work when ignored. The lane gives you Slow's dusty, blue purse-lipped hand. You slip a few into your costrol to tame tomorrow's ale if patience can be bottled. Blackberries ink your fingers with late summer handwriting. You accept the Thorn's editorial process as fair payment. Quirky tidbit: some country folk whisper that on midsummer night fernseed can make you invisible, which would be handy for lamping poachers and poets alike. Though nobody has ever produced the seed or the invisibility in daylight with witnesses, you pocket the rumor anyway. It weighs nothing and might one day keep you company behind a hedge. A magpie clacks disapproval from a hawthorn, guardian of both nests and gossip. You raise two fingers, ploughmans, salute and keep moving. By a low bank, you peel a strip of willow bark for a chew that murmurs to aching feet. A pilgrim taught you that, and you have been faithful to the lesson. The wind edits fields into blocks of cereal, calm and pasture chatter. And in the stubble of a harvested strip you glean with an honest back a few lost heads of barley, a handful of rye. No one minds this late in the crop story. Gleaning is the mercy built into harvest, a postscript you can eat. You grind the grains between two flat stones and pretend your hands are a mill with excellent manners. Toward evening, the world rubs its eyes. You circle back to the snare with that particular blend of hope and apology, and find the loop slack and the run a little wiser. You're relieved in a complicated way. Stew would be glorious, but so is not explaining yourself to a warrener with a stick. Forest law is a long shadow here. Deer are poems nobody else is allowed to recite. Boar are bygone kings, and even taking a fallen branch can be a conversation. You settle for the democracies. Mushrooms you can name by cap and gill without writing your will, a few hedgehogs, some field mushrooms, and a cluster of rose hips that promise tea if you can find patience and boiling water in the same postcode. Supper builds itself out of small braveries. Nettles wilt in a pan with a knob of the Abbey's pittance butter you've hoarded like a plot twist. The grains you ground toast until the pan smells like the kind of kitchen that wears an apron over good news. A little water, a little stir, and you have a barley mush that hugs the spoon and forgives the day. You shred a few leaves of sorrel at the end to wake it, crack a hazelnut over the top like a benediction, and eat with the calm focus of someone who earned each bite twice, once from the lane, once from leaving the snare empty. The ditch hums as frogs write love letters. You drink small beer from the costrol and taste the slow's astringent promise. Like a teacher who believes in your future and in homework. Light joke 2. You add amateur brewer to your resume, right under enthusiastic napper and bread analyst. The stars begin to file in by seniority. Somewhere a bell tolls for Compline, and you think kindly of the porter again. And of the Gestel's spoon-rubbed satin by gratitude. Your spoon tonight is your knife handle and your fingers, washed in the same ditch you refused to fish, which feels like a solid arrangement between appetite and ethics. You remember the market parsley and fold a sprig into the last of the mush. For dessert, 3 blackberries that turn your tongue into a heraldic device, and your mood into a chair by a hearth you don't yet have. Historians still argue whether foraging made up a major slice of peasant calories or mostly padded the edges during lean weeks. But you have learned that padding the edges can make the center hold. Light joke 3. You raise your costrol in a solemn toast to Hedgerow cuisine, knowing full well that if you ever wrote the cookbook, all the measurements would be a handful, a pinch, and whatever you can get away with. Night brings its sensible chill. You bank your little fire, brush the crumbs from your cloak, and tuck the pepper packet and Abbey badge safely in your pouch like 2 small, loyal thoughts. Law and luck have both eaten with you tonight and left you enough for breakfast in the shapes of nuts and promises. The hedge settles like a friendly wall, the ditch keeps its silver secrets. And you lie down on the road's good shoulder with the taste of sorrel still bright in your mouth, as if a meadow had leaned in to kiss your day good night. Streets take your elbows again, only closer together now. Stone that remembers hooves, gutters that learn every cloud by name. You move with the press until the city loosens a little and shows its food like a magician who can't keep a secret. Steam writes temporary letters over carts. Pies blink from wicker baskets, smiling briskly through their vents. A waferer turns a pair of irons over a brazier. The thin batter sighs, the plate hisses. And seconds later, a copper-freckled wafer cools on a board as neat as a coin. You swap a small coin and receive a crisp circle that tastes like flour having an excellent day. The vendor sprinkles a pinch of sugar over it, a sparkle that feels reckless and refined at once. You are not reckless, you tell yourself, while staring lovingly at a second wafer. Light joke 1. Portion control is the medieval art you keep meaning to apprentice in maybe next century. Spices walk the city wearing many hats: trade medicine, brag, and real flavor. At a stall near the mercer's, a pepperer rattles a small wooden box. Inside, peppercorns clatter like hail, and you think of that pebble black promise you tucked in your pouch 2 towns ago. Mainstream fact: London's Guild of Pepperers, ancestors of the grocers. Company organized the spice trade by the 14th century, weighing, blending, and keeping both quality and taxes from wandering off. The merchant lets you smell a twist of saffron. The thread's sunrise red and insolent. And you almost buy one because it's astonishing what a few orange hairs can do to a pot down to your sense of status mathematics. You settle instead for a finger-sized stick of cinnamon that turns your bag into a tiny, portable feast just by existing. Every city runs on rules and loopholes, and the food bylaws read like a diary of former mistakes. Butchers may not sell meat past its courage. Fishmongers may not plead fresh if yesterday already answered. Pie sellers mark their crusts, so blame knows the correct address if someone meets more beak than beef. The watch likes to catch regraders, those who buy food only to resell it dear an hour later, and forced who hoover up supplies before they ever reach the market. You call these people entrepreneurs if they share their snacks. The truth is simpler. Hot day, quick spoilage. You develop survival skills. Honor the short menu. Historians still argue whether enforcement bit as hard as the parchment growled, or whether half the rules mainly wagged their fingers while the city did what hunger always makes it do: eat first, lawyer later. You keep an eye for yesterday's pottage wearing today's hat. A cookshop near the bridge offers rewarmed stew with fresh greens, honest as a confession and priced as forgiveness. You sip. The greens really are fresh. A baker slices you a slab of regrated pie, a term that is definitely repurposed by salesmen filled with minced leftovers, raisins, and spice enough to persuade memory into calling it special instead of thrifty. The crust holds like a handshake. Quirky tidbit: at big feasts, the aftercourse voidy, the void, sometimes arrives as spiced wine hippocras port with wafers or comfits, while guests stand to drift away. On the street, the custom shrinks to a cup of something warm with a wafer's clean snap. A tiny party you can eat while walking. Close by, a gingerbread man, not the cookie, but the profession, cuts squares from a dark, pressed block scented with honey and pepper. It eats like a sturdy proverb. A boy with a cry like a trumpet sells warm doucets, small custard tarts, the tops trembling with dignity. You know better than to eat custard that has seen two suns. This one hasn't seen noon. You pay, you bless the chicken you never met, you carry on. Light joke too. You add son accountant to your resume, the costrel with slow counts as your continuing education. Pack horses nosing through the gate announce a caravan, bells tinkling like gossip. The loads are serious, bales wrapped tight, sealed jars, and a chest that smells faintly of the world's other rooms. Pepper in little turnkeys, comfits to settle stomachs, and signal that you keep an apothecary on retainer. You watch a factor inventory, a barrel of almonds with a little shovel. Each scoop a quiet fortune. A mercer's clerk trades jokes with a friar about whether cinnamon is a spice or a sermon. You try not to stare at the glove-soft leather pouch that probably holds enough mace to redecorate a dozen stews. Historians still argue whether sugar, by the late 15th century, belonged mostly to elites or trickled farther down the ladder in port cities. Your tongue votes for more common than legend, but never casual, especially when a jar costs the same as your boots. City water has moods. You lean toward ale because you like your microbes well employed. A tavern sells small beer, bright as brass and gentler than rumor. And in a corner two travelers quietly perform surgery on a dubious pie. The knife tip testing, the nose judging, the coin deciding. You repeat your lunchtime rules, believe the crowd. Honor the short menu on by a hot pasty with initials pricked into the lid to identify its maker. You crack the crust and find beef, onion, and a boredom proofing of pepper that makes your morning's cinnamon nod politely from the bag. The pepper heat buzzes like a friendly wasp. You chase it with a sip of ale, and feel your shoulders misread it as a massage. You remember your Abbey badge and smile. Gate kindness and street cleverness collaborate inside you, like two good cooks sharing a fire. At a corner you find an apothecary who sells comfits in tiny parchment, cones anise and fennel in sugar armor. The crunch satisfying in a way that makes your teeth feel knighted. He mutters about humors and the stomach's temper. You nod and pretend you didn't just buy sweets because they make the world sound like a small bell. Mainstream fact: sugar travels in through medicine as much as through dessert. Apothecaries sold it as a warming, balancing thing, and only later does it become the table's mischievous regular. You tuck the cone beside your precious pepper twist, and the last hero crumb of cheese like they're three cousins at a reunion. Spoilage has a way of hiding under compliments. You learn to ask when the fish arrived, to prefer pies that sell faster than gossip, to watch for a cook who tastes his own pot without flinching. A city crier strides by, announcing that the mayor has secured new fish from the coast. For tomorrow translation: eat today's now, or wait for better. You finish your pasty with the tidy focus of someone who fears nothing except regret. Light joke 3. You claim you're curating a tasting flight of practicality, which is a very fancy way to say you're on your second pie. Evening hangs lamps from doorways. Shadows lean into lanes like eavesdroppers. A wayfarer at the church porch takes advantage of the crowd after vespers. Irons kissing batter, steam ghosting upward. Couples share a wafer and leave with sugar freckles. A group of packmen split a hot meat pie 5 ways, a geometry of friendship that solves for hunger. You pocket a twist of clove for the road, one dark nail to nail down a sore tooth if it tries to stage a mutiny, and a palm of raisins because tomorrow has hills. The city exhales. Your pack smells of cinnamon, pasty warmth, parsley, and a small swagger. You step toward the gate with your costrol, the slow tinting the ale's edge like evening, and let the road take your full, polite weight. And now the streets grow quiet the way embers do, still warm, lower, willing to glow if asked, but mostly content to rest. Your steps slow without asking permission. The last vendor's brazier clicks as iron forgets fire, and the wafer irons lie open like 2 calm hands. Ready to close again tomorrow? The smell of cinnamon in your bag softens into background, a friendly trace that turns the air almost sweet. Far behind you, someone laughs once, gently. The sound folds into the stones and becomes part of their patience. Out beyond the gate, the road meets you without fuss. It's the same old ribbon as this morning, except that your hunger has sat down and taken off its boots. Wind moves through the hedges like a careful brush. The little leaves barely stir. You take a slow pull from the costrol and taste that faint, clean astringency from the sloe, a reminder that even small fruits can teach a drink to breathe. Your shoulders settle. The pack rides lighter than it should. Bread, a spice or two, that tiny cone of comfits rustling like a moth, enough, more than enough. A star appears where the sky remembers to be clear first. Then another. You let the pattern happen without naming it, because names feel loud right now, and quiet is the best flavor. Somewhere, water thinks to itself in a ditch. Somewhere, a dog circles a dream and goes still. You breathe in for a count that feels comfortable, out for just a little longer, letting the day slip its latch in your chest and wander off. If a thought returns, it returns like a warm loaf, simple, harmless, and you set it down on the windowsill of your mind to cool. Everything you carried took care of you. The rules and the kindness, the street heat and the head shade, the Abbey spoon and the pepper twist, they did their work, and now their work is over. You are fed, you are steady, and the road will be here when you wake to it again. For now, just drift, and let the embers of the day dim to a friendly dark.